Hello, kia ora, and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with artists from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Jakic. Good morning. I am very excited to introduce to you the amazing Esther Bunning. Esther is a photographic artist living in Greytown in the Wairarapa. She has had a long, successful photographic career, which started in wedding photography, then moved into more project and portrait photography, and now her personal fine art photographic practice has become one of her main focuses since 2020. At her core, Esther loves to illuminate others and give them their opportunity to shine. She is passionate about giving people a voice and is interested in the emotion and story behind her work. It's really important to her to balance this with her desire to create, experiment and explore, and to be curious in a less conventional way. Esther and I talk about how and why she loves to work with people. We talk about her wedding photography days and how this career shaped her skills and influenced her future photographic practice. She shares her experimental creative process, which is incredible, and some of the tricks, techniques and tools she uses for achieving such unique photographs. We explore many of her collections and the meaning behind the work she does. This is a really beautiful chat, which I know you're going to enjoy. Calling Esther Bunning in Greytown. Good morning, Esther.
Hi, Mandy.
It's lovely to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, it's amazing to be here talking to you. I've so enjoyed listening to the podcast that you've done, and it's it feels like a real privilege to be here.
So you are a prolific artist with a very long career, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all about it. So can we start, please, with your childhood, and we can maybe talk about how you actually discovered photography.
I was a farm girl. I grew up in Inglewood, in Taranaki, which is a small country town, and I guess I was always drawn to creative stuff. It was sort of my world. I was very quiet and introverted and shy, and it was sort of my way of, I don't know, just sort of escaping really and just going into my own world. Got three younger sisters, so I used to sort of draw them in as well into my creative world, and and it just sort of went from there. My grandmother was very creative, and I was very close to her. And I used to stay with her a lot. She lived in New Plymouth, and she painted. She did china paintings and all sorts of other things as well. And we shared a love of horses. And she used to paint horses and draw horses, and I absolutely adored them when I was growing up. So. I have very vivid memories of the times that I spent with her and our discussions, and it was a very special time.
Isn't that beautiful? I just love that when it's that kind of thing's passed on, and you know, she lives on through your work now.
She does.
Yeah. And I know that you were taking photographs for Santa as a teenager. Was that the beginning of your passion for photography?
It was actually. My father, bless him, he got me a holiday job as a Father Christmas photographer in our local department store in New Plymouth, and I did that 2 summers in a row, and bought my first camera, which was a Pentax ME Super, and it sort of threw me in the deep end, literally. just photographing all of these kids on centre's knee and having queues to the escalator and having to change film and all of those sorts of things. So it was very stressful, but it sort of threw me into photographing people. I guess it was the start of photographing people.
Yeah.
And, I guess all of my work has always predominantly been about people.
And that was the beginning.
Yeah, which in some ways is sort of surprising, I suppose, because when I look back now, I sort of think, gosh, it would have been so much easier, given my personality being so quiet and shy, if I just photographed food or landscapes or something else where I didn't have to deal with people. But it's, I think it's helped me grow so much as a person as well, both professionally and just socially, just everything really, I suppose. I've been forced into it, having to work with people, and I enjoy it.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it was something that was not so comfortable for you, but it was that's what you ended up sort of having as your main focus.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, really. I'm
Yeah.
still stunned about it.
Well, it's like some form of therapy through your practice for your for your personal life.
Yeah,
So high school for you, Esther, was that were you sort of involved in the art department at that point, and had you discovered photography through school?
Yeah, I mean, I was, that's what I loved. I absolutely loved art and art history and all of those sorts of subjects at school. Um, my art teacher, Mr. Stevenson at Inglewood High, he introduced me to the work of J.W. Turner when I was in the sixth form. And to be honest, it just, I don't know, it's his work has been one of those things that has just stayed with me, and I think it's probably had the biggest influence on my work throughout my entire life than any other artist. I just just totally fell in love with his use of light and texture and form and colour, and yeah, I think that it does show in my work as well, that sort of influence. So that was hugely instrumental in my entire direction, I think, for my work.
Did you decide that you wanted to, I mean, were you thinking you could make a career out of photography at that early stage?
Not at all. No, I actually I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I didn't really know what. So there weren't many options in the region at that time. So I applied for Wellington Polytech School of Design, and I didn't know anything about the different courses that were available. So to cover my bases, I actually applied for textile design, and I applied for visual communication design as well. So I put in a portfolio for each, and I got accepted for both. And I had to decide overnight, really, which one I was going to do. And I had nobody to advise me. Nobody could tell me anything about them. And I actually remember that, that phone call, and I had to let them know by the following day which course I wanted to do. And I had to make a decision based on nothing, not knowing anything. So I chose textile design, which, was which was interesting actually, because I did 3 years, and I realized very quickly into that it wasn't really something that I wanted to do. I didn't really want to work as a textile designer. There were aspects of it that I loved. I loved surface pattern design. I was particularly drawn to that, and I think that's where my love of Turner's work really came through as well. And we had amazing tutors. We really did. We had New Zealand artists like John Drawbridge and Kate Coulahan and Kate Wells, and they taught us for printmaking and life drawing and stuff like that. And the emphasis was very much on creativity the whole way through. And when I look back now, even though I realised I didn't want to become a textile designer, I'm incredibly grateful for those 3 years of just amazing creativity, really.
Yeah, and you can really see that in your work, I think. You can kind of tell that you've gone to these different places in the early stages of your career, because you do seem quite experimental, and you have lots of different techniques and different approaches to your photography. It seems like super creative, more so than some photographers. And that probably did come from that time where you were dipping into lots of different things.
I think it probably did, to be honest, because photography was one of my subjects as well. But even at that stage, it wasn't a career option. It was just one of the subjects in the mix of the other things that we were doing. So, yeah.
And you've also kind of come back to textiles a little bit with some of your collections, which is interesting.
Well, that's the amazing thing because, yeah, I never, after I finished textile design, I worked as a graphic designer for a couple of years, and then I began to do more and more photography on the side, and it sort of grew from there. But I never saw a way of integrating my textile design practice into my photography at all until really recently, like just the last few years. It's funny how things sort of go full circle, really.
Yeah, it's so lovely that you've come back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. From your, when you came out of your degree, as you said, you were starting to get into photography. How did that photography develop for you?
Well, as life has it, it was actually my partner at the time was studying photography, and we just started doing more and more photography together. And it grew from there. And I started photographing weddings. And I photographed weddings for 18 years. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I had a lot of creative freedom, I suppose, in the way that I was able to work with people. And at that stage, in the early days, of course, we were shooting films. So I used to do a lot of darkroom printing. I used to, paint on developer and just try different processes and explore using little plastic lenses, which I still do today, and all sorts of things like that. So I used to love that process, and double exposures on my plastic cameras that I used to do for weddings. Then they used to end up as like their wall prints. Couples would choose that sort of thing. I think partly because I was so excited about that sort of work and that it was a little bit different, and they used to get excited about it too. So I found it incredibly rewarding. I used to absolutely love it. I never had bridezillas. It totally immersed me in having to deal with people and orchestrate an entire day in terms of the photography, and make sure that everything happened and that I was able to get the results regardless of what the conditions were. And I think that's probably one of the most challenging things actually for a wedding photographer, is that you have to come up with the results. There's no room not to. You just have to come up with the results. And as a learning platform, now when I look back, I realise that the growth during that time, that it's given me the confidence now to be able to go into almost any environment, regardless of the light. It doesn't faze me if it's full sunshine or if it's dark, gloomy, or whatever. Like technically, I guess I've got those skills because of those wedding days that I had those sorts of conditions, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. So, yeah, it really kept me on my toes.
Yes, I can imagine. I can totally understand that. It's sort of make or break. You've just got to make it happen.
You've got to make it happen.
Yeah, and that is a great sort of training base for your practice.
It really is. In fact, I'd recommend that to any photographer. Go out and shoot weddings because you learn a lot about everything.
And it's so great that you were able to start experimenting with weddings. You obviously had people who were open to that.
I did. I had amazing clients actually. And like I said, I absolutely loved it. And I have to say, and I know this is sort of really embarrassing, but for the whole 18 years that I photographed weddings, I never did personal work. I never did any personal work whatsoever. I felt that because I had so much creative leeway, I guess, with the wedding work that I was doing, that I didn't have the need to do anything outside of that, which when I look back now, I think is crazy, to be honest, because what happened with my wedding work is that I literally woke up one morning and realised I just couldn't do it anymore. It literally happened overnight, and I got burnt out, and I didn't see it coming. It was totally unexpected, and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And I think that if I had had more of a balance over those years, it possibly could have been different.
Mm.
Funny, isn't it?
Mm. But perhaps that burnout was the catalyst for what needed to come next.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the way life works, I suppose.
Yeah. And it would have been, I guess, you put so much into a wedding day and that kind of photography and all the other things that you need to consider and all the relationships and connections, I can imagine could get quite full on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did the next part of Esther Bunning develop?
Well, of course, if I was going to give up weddings, then I had to do something else, didn't I? And portrait work had always been sort of a subsidiary of my wedding work, because the couples that I photographed then went on to have families and things like that. So I was still doing a little bit of portrait work, but nothing extensive. And I was never really sure. I think I'd sort of developed my own style with my wedding work, but I was never sure what my style was with portrait work. I knew I didn't really want to be doing what everyone else was doing with portrait work at that time, but I didn't really know what my style was. So I sort of threw myself into a project, which was just a local one actually, which was photographing children from around the region for a self-published book called Children of Wairarapa. And I can't even remember how many children I photographed, but it was a mix of ages from littlies right through to teenagers. And it was my first real project-based photography, self-signed photography thing that I did, I suppose, that it just forced me into discovering how I was going to photograph people.
Mm. And did you decide to make a book at the beginning of that?
Yes, I did. And they donated the sitting fee to Make-A-Wish. So we actually ended up with a substantial amount of money that we handed over with the publication of the book to Make-A-Wish Foundation, which was amazing. And yeah, and I produced a very small but compact little self-published book. And then it sort of made me realise that I did want to keep photographing people. I think probably one of the biggest turning points was in 2013. I met an amazing choreographer woman who lives locally here, and she was putting on a show, and it was about everybody's interpretation of what an angel was for them. And I could visualize this. I thought it was just absolutely an incredible concept. And I thought, I want to photograph these people. I want to photograph these angels and their interpretation of what it is for them. And they weren't professional actors or singers or dancers or anything like that. They were ranged from teenagers through to the oldest were in their 70s. And I photographed them all in the studio one by one, and it was an exploration into double exposure in a digital camera. And I'd done that with my film cameras, but I hadn't done it digitally before. And incredibly simple, just 2 exposures, and it was just extraordinary, I guess. People totally immersed themselves into their role, and they brought so much to the images. But at the same time, it was sort of their own story, and I was sort of just recording it. It was a pivotal point, I think, in realizing that my personal work was something that I needed to do. And that led on to another project with the choreographer, and that one was more complex. This time I decided to do multiple exposure, changing lenses between captures, using all my crazy techniques with, spraying water onto glass and shooting through that. And I guess I've always been drawn to that uh, movement and blur and abstraction, but telling a story through those layers so that it actually does reflect something of that person and their journey and their story.
And your works are so much like that. You are really telling a story, and as you look at them, I'm sure that everybody responds in their own way according to their own experiences and their own lives. They just kind of draw you in, and you need to look at them for a long time. I think all of your works are like that because there's so much to them, and they're so interesting and experimental and unique. Yeah, they're amazing. And I love that angel project. That sounds so beautiful. Yeah.
It was extraordinary. It really was.
And I feel like the fit with the choreographer is so perfect for your work as well, because there's so much movement in your work. It feels almost like there's dancing happening.
And I think that's the amazing thing with so many people. They don't feel comfortable in front of the camera. I think very few people feel comfortable in front of the camera, to be honest. But when they're immersed in something that is a reflection of them, and I think that's what I have drawn on with all of my portrait work, really, is what I love to do, is help people relax. And when they're in that zone where they don't really care that the camera's on them, they're totally absorbed into something that they really love as well. And I think that's when the magic comes through.
Yeah. And how do you set that up? Do they talk to you about their story before they sit for you?
Absolutely. So I think that's people always bring themselves to it, and that's what I really encourage. I do that a lot with words, with their story. After I did both the Angel project, and then I did Fire and Water, which was following on from there. And then I did another children's book, and this one was Children of Aotearoa. And it was a similar sort of concept to the small one that I did back in 2011. But this was a lot more children, but it was all based around their words, what inspired them, what they wanted to be when they grew up, what they loved to do. It could be anything from their favourite colour to, honestly, it's so diverse because we're all so different and we're all so unique, and actually that come through in the stories about the children. It was just amazing. Often the questions might be quite simple, like what's their favourite colour. There was one little girl I photographed, and she was about age 6, and I said, that was my question, what was her favourite colour? And she said, sometimes it's green and sometimes it's blue. Pink is not my favourite colour anymore. And it was that transition you could see from going from a little girl through to a next phase of her life as well. So I photographed her with green and blue swirling fabric and things like that. It's just absolutely amazing. It really does give me goosebumps. The little girl that I photographed, her favourite colour was black, and she wanted to be a pop star. And she would wear her mother's, in her ideal world, she would wear her mother's clothes and she would dress up and she would perform. And that's how I photographed her, And so even though there's this reticence to being in front of the camera, regardless of their age, whether they're 5 or whether they're 15 or whether they're 50, if you get them involved in something that they're bringing personally to the shoot, it changes everything.
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah. And then, those photos would just resonate so much with the sitter, but also with their family, and, because it's capturing that moment in time.
A little window on who they are at that particular time in their life.
Yeah, yeah. I love that so much. Yeah. And just talking about your process for that kind of photography, is it quite a long process where they come up with their story and their colours or their words or whatever, and then you kind of figure out and sort of visualize what the shoot's going to be like and ask them to bring certain things, or do you supply things, or how does that process work?
It's a combination. The direction definitely comes from them in the first instance, and I encourage them to bring whatever it is that is related to that concept, I suppose. So we sort of figure it out together. So it's very much a collaborative thing, which I really love. But trying not to let them overthink it either. Like letting them feel comfortable enough that they can just go with the flow. Once they're in my space or wherever it is that we're doing the photography, that they can just relax and go with it rather than overthinking it. It's really important. I guess that's a huge element of trust too, that they've got to trust in my in the way that I'm going to reflect what their story is.
Yeah. And do you have your different lenses and different tools that you use? And do you? Yeah, I love that. I love your variety of media that you use.
Literally. So I have all sorts of things. So plastic lenses, and I have all sorts of things like, my little Christmas decoration star, which I literally take everywhere, and I photograph all sorts on this. It just
and do you actually, pardon my ignorance, but do you actually just put the star straight in front of the lens and shoot through it?
I do, and a minimal depth of field, and I put my little star in front of the lens, and it gives these gorgeous aberrations. It just changes and reflects the light. It adds mood and atmosphere. And if I'm doing that in conjunction with, I don't know, whether it's backlighting or whether I'm shooting through water and perspex at the same time, or reflecting something through a window or whatever. So it's a combination of all of those elements. And I think that's what I really, really love, is that experimental stuff. I'm never sure what I'm going to get, and I'm not attached to a particular outcome. I might have a direction for the shoot. I set the parameters for it, but then what happens within that is really, it's that magic with the person that I'm photographing and how it all sort of evolves. So it's like creating a framework, but then anything can happen within that.
I love that. Oh my goodness. It feels like, what abstract painters might go through. You're not quite sure of where you're heading, but then when you're done, kind of thing, which is such a great feeling.
Yeah.
How amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I love that process. I love it. And also it's about problem solving too, because sometimes the words that people might have, or the concept might be quite left field, and I've got to think about how I can achieve that, how I can make that happen as well. And it's not up to them. I always say to them, don't you worry about, how that's going to take place or how that's going to evolve. That's my job. I'm going to work out how to make that happen.
It just sounds it's a beautiful process, isn't it? It's such you're both vulnerable. Like we were saying, when you record a podcast, there's sort of vulnerability from the photographer's point of view or the podcast host's point of view, and there's vulnerability for the sitter or the guest.
Yeah.
And because there's those two vulnerabilities coming together, I just think that creates an even deeper connection and a sort of trust that you wouldn't normally get. It's a privilege, isn't it, really?
Oh, it certainly is. It's amazing. I guess at its core, my portrait work is about connection. When I was in Standard 1 at school, my school teachers wrote on my report that I tended to hide my light under a bushel, and I think that's just a reflection of just being quiet and introverted and all of those sorts of things. But I think I've realised over recent years that actually what I do with my work is I give other people a chance to shine. It's putting a spotlight on them. It's telling their story in particular, rather than being about me or my work. It's a reflection of them. It's giving them that opportunity to shine. And that's what I love. That's what I sort of go out to do. I I see it with everyone I photograph, the reluctance, but it's their opportunity to, yeah.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. And that's probably why you get the beautiful images that you get, because of your approach and your attitude to that. You do work in collections, and it's all beautifully mapped out on your website, esterbunning.com. Beside that, there are other things like the Taonga commissioned artworks, which I find really fascinating. And that is where you ask a family to bring something that means something to them, and then you photograph it in different ways. Can you tell us about that collection?
Well, it's a relatively recent thing actually that I've been doing, but I'm really loving it. Once again, it's about that. It's that story. It's weaving history and heritage and everything into a piece of art for the wall. I find it really interesting, that we tend to fill our homes with artworks, but how often do we do it with pieces that are actually really relevant to us? That tell something of our story and our history. And we all have those things tucked away in our bottom drawers or in boxes wrapped in tissue that we don't really know what to do with. And I just think they make the potential to do something incredibly personal as an artwork that you can enjoy every day, that it becomes, that sort of mixes seamlessly with your everyday living, and that you get to enjoy it, you get to experience that. I think it's amazing, it's and it's something that I think we could consider more. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. And it's such a lovely way for people to tell their own personal historical stories, with friends and family or whatever, and then to pass it down generation to generation.
Exactly.
So how do you go about that? The big question.
Well, I've had a couple of really interesting commissions actually, and one of the first ones I did was a vintage petticoat, and I had this lovely lady contact me about photographing it because it was destined. The actual garment was destined for Te Papa, and she wanted a record of it. She wanted something because it had belonged to her mother. And she just really wanted something to be able to treasure since she wasn't going to have the garment anymore. So we talked about how best to represent that, and I photographed it, and of course it was just so gorgeous to work with. It was beautiful silk, and it was all hand embroidered, and it was just absolutely beautiful garment. And which is always quite nerve-wracking as well, photographing these incredibly special things. And the final artwork was a double exposure, so I'd incorporated her mother's initials that had been hand-stitched into the little bag that went with it, and I incorporated that into the final image. And then we printed that as 2/3 of the size of the garment, and it was all beautifully framed and everything. And yeah, it's just something incredibly special for her, and I know that it's something that she will pass down to generations.
And lovely for you to be able to work with different objects in that way. Yeah, and that's sort of still working with people, but having a different focus for the final result.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a really recent one was completely and utter opposite, and I had to weave together all of these elements that were quite diverse. And quite honestly, I had no idea how I was going to do that. It was really challenging, super challenging. And I always try and get into my client's head a little bit beforehand and try and work out, what their aesthetic is. It's really useful if I see their home or, potentially the place where it might go on the wall, all of those sorts of things. They sort of help me build a picture of what it is that they envisage as well. So Oh boy, it really does. It really does test me, and I'm always so apprehensive when I go to show them the results as well. Generally, I do a couple of different versions, so that they can. They've got a couple of options to choose from, and I present them in a way that shows it on a wall, um, with particular framing. So I love being able to visualize it right through to the final presentation and make suggestions. And I guess it's problem solving at the end of the day. It's putting all of these things together.
How do you approach things like composition and the way you sort of arrange the objects, especially if you have more than one? And are you experimental as well in this collection?
Absolutely, I really am. Absolutely, and I photograph them in different ways. So, at the core, I'm using photography as a tool to capture those items, and then it's weaving them together. So, whether that's in double exposure in the camera, because that's my first love, I guess, is actually doing it in the camera at the time of capture. But sometimes it's creating, putting those elements together afterwards as well. So it's a combination of both. You know, I might do about 8 or 9 different versions, and then might only present the client with a couple, and I progressively trash them as I go, because I can see that development as it evolves as well, which is always really fascinating too, because even though I like a sort of quite refined finish for an artwork, I think my process tends to be more erratic and organic, is probably a better way of putting it, rather than erratic. It's once again, it's always about those happy accidents that happen along the way, and that experimental process.
Mm. And what happens if, or have you ever had it that a client hasn't been happy with your initial interpretations?
I can honestly say no, because I work really, really hard to try and get it right. I work really hard at it, with trying to understand the requirements beforehand, and that comes down to my portrait work as well. It's I put a lot of work and effort into understanding um, what the brief is, or what the commission is, and then trying different things, I suppose. And if I
Mm.
didn't get it right, I would just keep going at it until I got it right.
Yeah. The clients know your work and are obviously really interested in that sort of surprising experimental work that you do create, so that they're coming to you for, that's one of the reasons, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that when they're able to just let go a little bit and trust in the process, they're probably going to end up with a far better result from me as well. I just love it when I've got that, that fluidity, or that opportunity to just, work within their brief as well. So after I finished
Yeah.
the children of Aotearoa book, which just about killed me, to be honest. It was a massive project, and I did all the design and everything, and that came out at the end of 2017, like right on Christmas. And once again, I got totally burnt out. It just completely and utterly wiped me out. And I went into 2018 thinking, I actually need a break from photographing people. I just need to do something a little bit different. And I sort of thought, what can I do? What can I do? What can I immerse myself in that's just going to be a change? And I thought, horses. I just, it took me back to my childhood. It took me back to those times with my grandmother. And our shared love of horses moving and galloping and all that sort of thing, and the way she used to paint them. And so one thing led to another, and to cut a story short, I managed to get in to photograph the wild Kabanawa horses in 2018, which was absolutely mind-blowing, getting into defence land, which was the beautiful Argo Valley, and photographing in there. And I also did a number of other horse shoots and things like that year as well. At the end of 2019, I had the opportunity to apply for the Anzac Bridge Fellowship, which is shared by the New Zealand Pacific Studio and the Friends of Anzac Bridge, which is it's a regular thing that happens with a memorial bridge just out of Eketahuna in the Wairarapa. And this particular year, which was 2020, it was upcoming to 2020, they were focusing on the horses and the riflemen that went to war in World War One. And so I applied for that fellowship and I was granted it. So I found out in January 2020, and which was terribly exciting. I'd never done anything like that before, but of course it was a result of my horse work and that I did in 2018 with Commander, was that it gave me the portfolio work to actually present for that. And so in March, the beginning of March 2020, I did the photography for that project. One of the things I realised when I put in my application for the Anzac Bridge fellowship was that because the images were going to be shown at the bridge on Anzac Day in 2020, that was the plan, I couldn't present images that were in a frame, for example. You know, it was a rural outside location. I had to think differently about how the photographs were going to be shown. And I was out walking one morning and I had the thought that I could print them on fabric. I thought, wouldn't it be amazing just to do them as like banners, and the children could carry them, because it was a community project. So I got involved with one of the local schools as well, and they created words and pictures and everything to go with the photography that I incorporated into the final flags. And which sort of took me in that full circle back to my textile days. So in March 2020, I started the residency and I did the photography, which was just amazing, absolute incredible experience, with the intention of them being shown as flags for Anzac Day 6 weeks later. But of course, as we all know, what happened in March 2020, things changed rapidly. I remember ringing the company that were going to print the flags and said, well, was there any way that we could just print a couple of flags so we can get them up for Anzac Day? And they said, nope, they were literally sending their staff home that afternoon because, you know, everything was just shutting down big time. It was a crazy time, of course, we all know that. And I honestly thought that the project was just never going to happen then. You know, it was there was so much uncertainty about everything, and because it was a residency that happened on a frequent basis, I thought I might have lost the window for it. As it turns out, it was pushed over to 2020, which was just incredible, and it took it from being, you know, just a 6-week project to actually being over an entire year, which meant that we were able to get more community involvement. We managed to get the flags printed for all of the towns in the Wairarapa, which was amazing, seeing them go up.
Wow.
And for Anzac Day 2021, the children all carried them in to that location, the outside location. It was the most beautiful day, and the horses there, and we had riflemen on horses, and it was just extraordinary. It was an incredible project to be a part of.
Yeah, that would have been so emotional for you.
It was. I think it was emotional for everybody involved. It was phenomenal. It wasn't just me, it was the whole community, you know, it was all the children, it was everybody behind it, it was the towns, everyone. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
That's incredible. And what did those photographs on the flags look like?
Well, they were a combination of the photographs that I took, the children's words and stories. I went in and did a workshop in one of the classes, and they spent an afternoon getting inside the heads of what they thought it would have been like to be a soldier in World War One, or a horse going off to war, and they were just amazing. They just totally took it on board.
I love the way you've incorporated the red poppies, you know, in a sort of transparent kind of way. I'm not sure how you explain it, but they have a real presence, or the colour red as well throughout those works. It's almost like that was a sort of connector.
Yeah, and just to fill you in on how I do that, I actually waving my red poppies around in front of the camera. So I'm actually doing that in the camera at the time I was shooting. So I was, a dawn shoot with my incredible rider on her horse in World War One gear, and I'm waving poppies around in front of the camera.
Amazing. So technical.
Videos, I think, of me doing it. So yeah, so technical, so technical.
But so beautiful. And that the blurry kind of double exposure style just seems to suit that theme so beautifully.
I think my arts practice, I mean, with the exception of my personal work, which I have been doing for a while, I suppose, but my actual arts practice is really, really recent. It's only been since 2020, to be honest.
And do you see that as a separate thing, that your personal art practice is when you're seeing yourself as a photographic artist?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think because it sort of feels really new. I think because my arts practice tends to be less about people and more, like the landscape silks, I suppose, which, I mean, I've never photographed landscapes in my life. I've never done that sort of work. I've always admired landscape photographers. I always thought to myself, how can they go out and know where to point a camera at a landscape when it's all so beautiful? I've always absolutely marveled about that. And it never even crossed my mind in an instant to go and even think about doing anything like that, to be honest. And it was actually when I was photographing the horses for the Kamanawa trips, and I sort of thought to myself, I actually don't need to photograph landscapes the way that other people photograph landscapes. I can photograph them the way I photograph people, which sort of sounds kind of weird, but using my layers and my depth and the different techniques and things that I use to tell a little bit about that landscape rather than using a conventional lens, I suppose. And why treat it any differently to the way that I'd photograph anything else, I guess. Which was a bit of an eye-opener.
Yeah.
Thought about photographing a landscape like that at all. And, using minimal depth of field and just some of those other tools. But still working with the light and, all of those things that are just so prevalent, I suppose, in landscapes.
And your Aotearoa landscape silk stories, they are stunning, and the one I'm looking at now has a word in it as well, Aotearoa. And the way, as you said, that you capture light on that work is so incredible, and it's so unexpected to have that silk within the landscape. How do you go about it, and what are your ideas behind it?
That was actually a COVID vision, believe it or not. So it was just after I had COVID, and I went. It was one morning, and I went off to my personal trainer. It was about 10 days after I'd had COVID, and I probably shouldn't have gone because I wasn't in the right physical state or headspace or anything. But I was sitting there on the bike that morning, and I suddenly had this vision of silk blowing, and I thought, I could just print some landscapes onto silk and incorporate the handwriting and things like that as well. I've always loved working with words, whether it's people and their words or and this was just integrating words into a landscape. So it was literally a COVID vision. It was really weird. So that's what I did. So I printed some of my landscapes, which were double exposures, and shot the way that I love to work with the words onto silk, and then rephotograph them in the landscape. So you get that light. I just love that movement and the texture of the silk, and the fact that it's not a static image. I've never been drawn to a static image, I suppose. I love that sense of movement and flow and all of that. So it's unstructured.
They're your photographs on the silk?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Sorry, yes. So they're all my images and my handwriting and all of that sort of stuff on the silk, and then rephotographed in the
Wow.
landscape. And depending on how I photograph it as well, like it could be, if it's a grey day with very little wind, it's going to give a completely different feel to, say, a blue sky day with a lot of wind, and then still doing double exposures and things like that as well. So then you get that layer upon layer upon layer, which changes that landscape again. It's sort of, it adds new valleys and new hills and, all of that sort of thing. So
Mm. Is it just you working by yourself, or have you got someone draping the silks in front of your camera?
Um, no, the my dear partner, he sort of constructed me this. It's like a washing line type thing, I suppose, with these really heavy bases that I sort of stagger around with my poles stuck in them, and then I peg up my silk and my fabrics, and then I put it all in the back of the car and take it off to a coastal location or whatever.
Wow, that's amazing.
Amazing time, just following the flow of the fabric, I suppose. I absolutely love it. And once again, it's not knowing what I'm going to get, it's that,
Mm.
my God, when I come back and download and have a look and think, oh my God, it's just magic.
Yeah, I bet. And the work that you put onto the silk, is that in connection or in response to a particular landscape that you've found that you want to photograph with the silk, or is it quite separate?
It's more about the light, I think, to be honest, as much as anything. I'm drawn to beautiful light.
And you're almost making landscapes into abstract works or abstract landscapes, aren't you?
I know. It sounds very complex when I explain to people what my process is. Their eyes sort of glaze over a little bit. It's like, why? Why would you do that? I don't know why I do it, really, to be honest. But it's I just love that. I love that creative process, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful interpretation of land.
Yes, the land is always shifting under our feet, isn't it? And I guess they sort of reflect that. Yeah.
Mm.
And our relationship with the land as well is always changing and evolving. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you really capture movement with that sort of moving silk and the sort of gentleness of the way silk moves in the air. And that very much comes through. And then you've got another collection called The Secret Keeper, which is really quite different, isn't it? Can you tell us about that one?
Yes, The Secret Keeper is an amazing collaborative project that I have been working on since 2020. Actually, during the lockdown in 2020, I had a sculptor, artist called Catherine Daniels contact me, and she asked me if I would photograph her girls, and her girls are her sculptures that she has been working on for a very long time, and they reflect her journey of sexual abuse and childhood trauma. And they range from really small sizes right through to the size of a 4-year-old girl. And when she asked me initially to photograph them, I was trying to understand what it is that she wanted me to capture. I just sort of thought to myself, does she want me to photograph them, just all on a plain background as a record for her? But no, she wanted an individual portrait of each girl, which was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. So my partner and I, spent a couple of days photographing all of her girls. She had about 35 at that time, and they have grown. She's got over 70 of them now, and we've done portraits of them. And my partner Terry did a video of them as well. What she really saw in my work was that storytelling, the depth and the layers and the emotive qualities as well. She just wanted that to be able to really come through and tell her story. Yeah, so she asked me to photograph them for her book that she was doing. So that's what I did, um, and then it's grown from there. She's an amazing woman and with an incredible story to tell, and it's been such a privilege working with her. We have done a number of exhibitions now, and the exhibitions are a mix of her sculptures and framed prints of portraits of her girls.
Mm. And you put them, you choose where you want to put them, and how you compose the shot.
Yeah, so she's given me a lot of creative freedom, I suppose, in how I photograph them. Once again, um, it's understanding her story, I guess, and the way that I approach that, and wanting to wanting to do her words justice, I suppose, as much as it's
Mm.
um, yeah, it's a real privilege working with her. Incredible.
And you really do capture that. This collection, I feel, is quite different to your other collections. There's a heavier feel about it, but and probably less movement in some ways. But they are so striking, and you still bring in these really interesting experimental techniques. So that sort of goes throughout, really, doesn't it?
Yes.
Really beautiful.
Yeah.
So, you have an incredibly varied practice, all under the umbrella of photography. And you've had a really varied career. And I just love the way all of your work has sort of informed work that's come later, or, it all is beautifully connected right back to when you were studying textiles at university, you know, and, uh, and how the wedding photography would have informed what you do now as well. And yeah, it's really interesting. But you're not actually represented by a particular gallery. Obviously, a lot of your work is commission based, or project based. So, how do you go about getting your name out there and making those connections with people to get commissions like that?
With the commission work, I guess a lot of it's word of mouth. The more I do, the more I show, all of that sort of thing. It's a continually evolving thing. But I must admit that I don't find putting myself out there easy at all. I think it just comes back to my personality. I'm not it's not my comfortable space on social media. I force myself to do it, but I I don't find it easy. I really struggle with all of that stuff. I could certainly do better at it, that's for sure. Um,
But you have a steady stream of commissions and work to do.
yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, so you must be doing something right. That's so good. And is being represented by a gallery something that you are wanting to do in the future?
uh, Certainly open to that. Um, I feel very new, I guess, at the arts practice stuff, and I feel like I'm still finding my feet with it all and evolving and experimenting, and I'll probably always experiment, I suppose, but I'm not exactly sure what my place is yet, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure all of that out. And I guess, a lot of my work is sort of very intuitive. And I work better that way when I don't overthink it, because otherwise I have a tendency to overthink it. So I think I just need to trust in the process, I suppose. Just
Yeah,
what direction it takes will be what's meant to be, I guess.
that's right. And trust in the journey. And, I'm sure these things will sort of naturally just happen anyway as your artistic practice develops.
Yep, exactly.
Which is great. And you are entering art awards and things like that, which is really great. And that's a really good way to get your work out. And then you have been a finalist in the Parkin Drawing Prize, which is fascinating. How does your photography fit with the drawing brief?
Well, the wonderful thing about that particular award is that it is so open. It's more about the interpretation of, which I think is really, really exciting. I think that's fabulous. We don't need to. I think a lot of people tend to put photography in a box. Like, this is what a photograph is. But of course, it doesn't have to be that at all. It can be It can be completely different and varied and can be printed on any sort of substrate. It doesn't have to fit a particular format or size or finish or anything. And that's what I love about the medium, and the fact that, awards like that recognise it, that there isn't that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
some of the other awards, they don't allow photography, which I think is very closed-minded.
Yes. I've talked to somebody else about that. That's such a shame, and I hope that can change.
Exactly. Yeah.
Doesn't seem right. I mean, it's another medium.
Yes, exactly. And it's
Mm,
interpretive like anything else.
mm. And I really do feel like your photography is very artistic. I mean, I feel like it's totally, you can see it's an artist's work. So shall we get on to the questions, Esther? What would you say to your younger artistic self?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. I'd say have more confidence, Esther. Trust your intuition, all of those sorts of things. I think, but yeah, I've just spent too much of certainly my younger years, but, right up until now, just that self-doubt and second guessing and overthinking and all of that sort of stuff. And it's like, just go with the flow, trust the process, listen to your intuition. That's really important.
And what challenges do you have as an artist or as a photographer?
I think, well, probably the main challenge would be that this is how I make my living. This is my partner and I are both creatives, and we make 100% of our income with the work that we do, and that's always challenging. Paying our mortgage, supporting teenagers and all of that sort of stuff. So and um, and staying relevant, I guess, with our work too. Which I guess, not that it's a driving force, but I am always changing and evolving, and my work is always changing and evolving as well. And I think that's really important to stay relevant.
Mm. And what artists inspire you or sort of inform your practice in some way?
Oh, there are so many. There really are. I think at its heart, though, it would be artists whose work speaks to me. It's work that's got soul and depth and storytelling and araha and just all of those things, I think, rather than being necessarily just straight, decorative, refined work. There are, in general, it's probably more artists rather than photographers, but there are a couple of photographers who really do inspire me, and one of them is a photographer that I know through the NZRPP called Jackie Rankin, and she's based in Twizel, and her work is unexpected. It's she's got all of those sorts of things that I was talking about, the depth and the story, and she experiments and she crafts an image, which I think is such a beautiful way to be a photographer. Fleur Wicks, I love the work of Fleur Wicks. And she was a photographer. She's based in Whanganui, and her work incorporates mark making and line and story and words, and she's got a photography base. There's an American photographer called Jeremy Coet, who is forever breaking the rules and trying different things and just doing crazy, mad stuff, which is really inspiring. And I love his work, and I love the way that he just does that. And recently I treated myself to a piece of artwork by a local artist who I know here in Greytown, and she's about to move back to the UK, and her name is Victoria Willis, and I bought a piece of her work, and it's just got so much soul and depth and beautiful use of colour, and it's that storytelling. That's the sort of thing that inspires me, I suppose, with artists. Yeah.
Mm. And lastly, why do you make the kind of work you make?
Oh, that's a tough one. Actually, I was talking to a friend the other night over dinner, and I said that was one of the questions, and I said I have no idea why I do what I do. And she sort of gave me a little pep talk, and and she's right. It is about the creative process. It's the fact that I love to explore and experiment, and then I'm not. I think probably one of the key things is I'm not attached to a particular outcome. It's what evolves and comes out of that, and and I love being open to that process, and that's where I find the magic in the creating, is actually doing that. It's just being open to what happens. I mean, the final artwork, sure, that's a bonus, if I really like it, but it's that creative process, I think, that inspires me the most.
Yeah,
I'm immersing myself in that.
I can see that. Yeah. And just one more question. What do you see yourself sort of achieving in 2024, and where do you think you're heading in the future?
I've got so many things I want to do. I definitely want to do. I want to do a lot more fabric work, and exploring different fabrics. How that's going to look, I'm not really sure. But I love the tactile quality of them, and I love combining my image making with those sorts of substrates. And I've got this urge to throw paint around more as well, and incorporating that into my work, into my photography too.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And honestly, Esther, I find your photographic practice incredibly inspiring, and the way that you focus on the creative process is really what I'm all about in the work that I do as well. And I just think it's such a fantastic role model for so many people to see, you know, to approach art in a way that is open and experimental, and just kind of go with that focus on the process, and amazing stuff happens. And I'm so glad that you finally agreed to talk to me. We did meet at Art in the Park in 2023, and I suggested you might like to be on the podcast, and you're a little bit horrified. And I think your story has been really fascinating and inspiring. And thank you very, very much for coming onto the podcast and for sharing your thoughts and your beautiful art practice.
Thank you so much, Mandy. Thank you for having me. Thank you. You've been lovely.